What Really Happened with your host, Mike Rivero. You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, where you'll find out what the Fukushima's going on.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show. It is Wednesday, June 8th, 2016, middle of the week here. We got a lot of stuff to talk about today. And yes, if you're trying to reach our site, the bad people took it down just as we were getting ready for airtime, knowing that I can't stop talking long enough to fix it. So we're just going to have to wait them out and try and fix it on the commercial breaks here. Okay, we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room. And today our third hour guest is going to be Peter Koenig. He is talking about the coming collapse of the EU. And so we'll be talking about that. Tomorrow, of course, Alice Min-Soo Chun, who's invented this amazing solar-powered emergency light. And of course, Friday, the Lady Claire will be joining us. Now, today is also the anniversary of Israel's attack on the USS Liberty. And, of course, Israel kept insisting it was an accident. It was an accident. We thought it was this Egyptian horse trading, horse carrier ship, because we all know that horse carrier ships have giant dish antennas all over them. And our pilots have got lousy eyesight, and anybody who isn't willing to go for that, is just being a filthy, Jew-hating anti-Semite who wants Hitler to come back and gas the Jewish babies in the ovens. Now, as you know, yesterday were the primaries. Hillary Clinton appeared to seal the deal about being the Democratic nominee. And already we are seeing just this monumental outcry from all of these primary states about vote fraud going on. Article coming out already from Election Fraud 2016. LA voters feel ballots won't count. Lawsuits are being filed. Voters are furious. And last night, the corporate media refused to put out the exit poll numbers. Finally, today they did. The exit poll numbers in California were off by more than 15%. And that tells us fraud was taking place. The whole reason for having exit polls is to check the official results. And when they don't line up, fraud has taken place. Now, of course, that's not what they say when it's Hillary running. Back in 2008 when she was running against Barack Obama. And she had that sudden miraculous come-from-behind victory in New Hampshire. And the official results didn't line up with the exit polls, and they said, oh, well, the voters were lying to the exit pollsters. That's the explanation, which doesn't make any sense. You don't know who those people are. So it's utterly, utterly ridiculous to be saying that. In any other country, when the exit polls don't match the official results, the first thing they scream is election fraud, election fraud, election fraud. So there's actually already an online petition to open an investigation into Hillary Clinton and the Democratic National Committee for election fraud. Now remember, their attitude is going to be, you have to prove we committed fraud. No, that's not how it works. You have to prove that you won the election honestly and fairly. That's what you have to do. Okay. All right, let me get onto this here just a little bit, and I'm sorry to be silent here, but I have to get the SiteGround people onto this thing. Okay, they'll now be taking care of it. All right, so getting on back to this thing, online petitions for online petition for an investigation into Hillary Clinton and the Democratic National Committee for Vote Fraud. And if anybody actually looks, they'll see it. There was all the fun and games with the primary ballots, refusing to tell voters who were not on the voter rolls that they could get a crossover ballot. They have been just pushing this thing to Hillary all the way along. Debbie Wasserman Schultz was fully on board with Hillary. They literally bought and paid for the super delegates with a Hillary PAC. This is a very dishonest election. By the way, last week we reported on this story of rumors about how the corporate media was going to declare Hillary Clinton the Democratic nominee even before yesterday's polling. And, of course, Associated Press did that Monday night. And now indications are coming on out that, in point of fact, Hillary Clinton's campaign was coordinating with Associated Press. Their announcement was planned days in advance. And the reason they did it was to discourage the Sanders voters and trick them into staying home. Now, over in the courtroom where Judicial Watch is trying to get at the bottom of the email server and all that was going on, Judge Emmett Sullivan has issued a court order for Brian Pagliano to submit a copy of this immunity agreement that he has to justify his ability to say that he has a right to First Amendment protection against self-incrimination. If it's a blanket immunity agreement, then he can't do that. If he refuses to testify, he can go to jail for contempt of court. But here's what's really important to keep in mind on when you talk to people about what is going on. This is an investigation to produce documents, rather. This is a case about Freedom of Information Act. Brian is testifying about how Hillary Clinton's email server was set up. Why does he need the Fifth Amendment at all, unless there is something criminal about that server? Which is what Brian has basically told everybody by saying he's going to claim the Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. He knows something criminal was done that he can go to jail for. And I'm sure he's very much afraid of getting depressed and winding up in Fort Marcy Park or in a small airplane or any of that stuff. So the judge wants to see the immunity agreement. Now, Joseph DiGenova over at the Daily Bail is saying that when Hillary Clinton deleted those 30,000 emails, that was a federal crime because it violated the open records law. Now, Hillary's trying to claim it was all her personal email. We don't know that. And by the way, we do know that Hillary Clinton did, in fact, violate Section 793 of Title 18 when she ordered Jacob Sullivan to strip those classification headings off a document. And it doesn't matter why she did it. It doesn't matter what was in the document. It doesn't even matter if Jacob Sullivan refused to do it. The giving of that order was the felony violation. Hillary Clinton is criminal. That's all there is to it. Now, something else to keep in mind, Trump has smashed the primary vote record by 1.4 million votes. He was able to get the voters out. Republicans are far outstripping Democrats in primary voter turnout, and that bodes very well for Donald Trump come November. When you rely on vote fraud to steal the Democratic nomination, you've not been very good at mobilizing those Democratic voters. Now, the liberal media is going ballistic. They are now on the warpath against Donald Trump. The Huffington Post is out there saying violence to Trump and his supporters is a logical solution to block his nomination. They're literally advocating for violence. We know they're hiring people to be violent through those Craigslist ads. And what does the media do? Well, it's all Trump's fault. Trump is to blame for the violence. If he would just shut up and go away and let Hillary be empress, we would stop paying the people to be violent. Now, I want to talk again about this story that came out yesterday. Apparently, Sheldon Adelson made an offer to Donald Trump that he would donate $200 million to Trump's campaign in exchange for Donald Trump agreeing to have Newt Gingrich as his vice president. Donald Trump turned him down flat. Remember, we were hearing all this thing about, oh, Donald Trump is getting money from Sheldon Adelson. That proves he's selling out to Israel. And then it was about Newt Gingrich. Well, if he's picking Newt Gingrich, he's selling out to the establishment. Trump did neither. These were teases in the media trying to push this little thing along. But Donald Trump turned him down. Now, you need to remember, Donald Trump, early in his campaign, promised that he could not be bought, and he just proved that. Now, everybody is still on Donald Trump's case about this comment he made about the judge in this bogus lawsuit against the Trump University. And they're all saying, oh, he's slamming Mexicans, he's slamming Mexicans. No, what you need to do is take a closer look at what's going on. The federal judge handling this Trump University lawsuit is tied to the La Raza Hispanic Nationalist Organization. This is a group whose agenda is for California to be broken off from the United States and returned to Mexico. And obviously that judge is going to have bias. And as Larry Klayman came on out and said yesterday, judges do have bias. They have prejudice. Klayman found that out when a Clinton judge threw out his RICO lawsuit. Alan Favish found it out when the entire United States Supreme Court refused the request for photographs of the crime scene where Vincent Foster's body was found on the laughable excuse that dead people have a right to privacy that extends to the family. And in no prior case was that ever cited as legal justification. Up until the Alan Favish case, your privacy ends when you die, because at that point, you don't care anymore. And privacy has never been extended to family who are not directly involved in whatever documents or photographs are involved. And Vince Foster's family were not at Fort Marcy Park. They're not in those pictures. It's not a violation of their privacy. So, let's see. Over in the war zones, the shelling at Aleppo is getting worse. Dozens have been killed. Over 160 gunmen heading for Aleppo coming across the Turkish border. And apparently they're being followed by huge shipments of arms. However, it's too little too late. The Syrian army has won back more of the key villages in Aleppo province. This operation to retake Aleppo is failing already. And they're even getting help. Israeli jets are attacking the Syrian military in Alms. Tells you which side they're on. They're attacking the Syrian military base. It's an act of war. All right, we're going to go ahead and grab ourselves a phone call from Randy in Texas. Aloha, Randy. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, it looks like Sheldon Adelstein made Donald Trump an offer that he could refuse.
Yes. It took me a second to get that reference. Yes, you're absolutely right.
Yeah, and I've been watching the spew on MSNBC. It's like every other word is Trump, racist, Trump, racist, Trump, racist.
Yeah, it really is. You know, which is weird, because back in 2006, Hillary Clinton was saying we needed a wall to keep the illegals out of this country.
Yeah, and the fact that they misrepresent what Donald said. They said he thinks all Mexicans are rapists and murderers and drug dealers. No, that's not what he said.
He's never said that. He has never said that.
Well, you know, why let the truth get in the way of a good lie, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't even recall this being the same way whenever Perot was running.
No, it was a little bit more of a gentleman's game back then, but for the last quarter of a century, the presidential campaigns and even congressional campaigns have been getting more and more vicious, and I know it's alienating the voters. It is not setting a good example for the rest of the world. In fact, to be very honest, right now, the world is laughing at the United States over the obviousness of the election fraud taking place in this country.
Oh, I know. And the thing is that you look at people like Dr. Paul and Mr. Perot. These were gentlemen. I'm afraid Donald Trump is not going to be a gentleman. he is going to sit there and slug back just as hard as they slug him.
Well, that's a good quality here. I mean, let's face it. Why should he be a gentleman when Hillary Clinton is not being a lady?
I don't think the woman has ever been a lady. Just my personal opinion. Okay. Anyone that would sit there and say F you to someone who's assigned to protect them with their lives, there's something inherently wrong with that.
Yeah, there is, but you know, politicians don't have a lot of respect for military people. Remember what Henry Kissinger used to say, military people are just dumb, stupid pawns to be used in foreign policy, and it really is that attitude. I mean, look at the way...
I believe he actually called them animals.
Yeah, I think you're... I thought it was pawns, but you may be right, it was animals. What's really kind of interesting is if you look at the way the U.S. government treats our wounded veterans when they come home and they're no longer of use to, attack the enemy and steal their property, and just look how they're ignored and discarded, and you begin to understand what's going on.
Oh, yeah. Unfortunately, I back the warriors, I just don't back the wars, you know?
Exactly the same here. Exactly the same here. I have a lot of respect for those young people who put on the uniform and take the oath. They're just being seriously, seriously misused by the civil government, and I have issues with that. Their lives should not be thrown away for light and callous reasons.
Yep. Amen to that, brother. Well, anyway, that's about all I had to say, so let me leave, and you have a good day, Mike.
All right. Well, thank you very much here for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Now, the United States Monday was asking Russia to please stop bombing Al-Qaeda. Today, they're making it a demand. We demand you stop bombing Al-Qaeda and our pet terrorists. How dare you? Which, again, tells you Al-Qaeda has been working for the United States government all along to redraw the map of the Middle East and bring all these countries under U.S. domination. Now, a lot of people are very concerned about this NATO war game virtually on the border with Russia. They're calling it Anaconda 16, and they're simulating invading another country, including building temporary bridges, military bridges across rivers. It's a dress rehearsal for World War III. In fact, that's even the headline coming out of the original antiwar.com. Now, out of prudence, Vladimir Putin has deployed Russian troops to Russia's side of the border with Ukraine. And they're saying this is in response to the NATO exercises. Because when you have that big of an army exercising, it only takes one order to turn the exercise into an outright invasion. It's a concern that people have over the drill going on at the border with Crimea. And, of course, in the Western media, he's being provocative, he's being aggressive, he's putting his troops on his side of the border. How dare he do that? And it is rather ridiculous. Putin knows the U.S. is gunning for him. They're going to start the war just as soon as they can figure out how to make it look like it's Russia's fault. Another story coming out of Pravda. Should Russia worry about a Fourth Reich? And they're looking at the fact that Germany, under Merkel, pretty much dominates the EU right now. And Merkel is fully on board with this NATO mobilization and sneering at Russia. And Russians remember how badly they suffered the last time Germany got too big for its britches. Now, one of the things that we posted, actually, we're coming up in a commercial break, and we'll be back after these few words. Hello, welcome back to our show here, and yes, apparently the What Really Happened server is under a massive distributed spoofed IP denial of service attack, which is very, very difficult to defend against. And my comment about that is anybody who's resorting to these kind of tactics is basically admitting to the world they couldn't win their point of view on the facts, logic, or law. So they have to cheat. And they think cheating somehow makes them a superior human being. And it doesn't. It just makes them a human being that is willing to cheat. All right. Now then, something I put up on WhatReallyHappened.com is the official enlistment form for the U.S. military. And I want you to copy off. It's a PDF file. Have it on your local machine and have printed out copies with you when you travel around, because the government shills are already switching from attacking Bernie Sanders to trying to sell the idea of a war with Russia or China or whoever. We must have war. We must have war. So have these enlistment forms ready to email or hand out. When anybody says we need to have a war, just go ahead and send them the enlistment form and say, okay, please fill this out. If you're talking to them in person, say just fill it out right now. I go right by the recruiting office on my way home. I would be absolutely thrilled to, drop it off for you. And that usually will shut them up. All right, let's take a phone call. John in Southern California. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Good afternoon, Mike. Mike, I just had a question on your broadcast yesterday. And I just caught the tail end of the story, and it really caught my ear. And it had to do with tens or hundreds of millions of dollars of debt that was purchased by some group that ended up satisfying it all according to law for several tens of thousands of dollars, something like that.
Yeah, that was John Oliver, and on the TV show last week tonight, they bought up $15 million worth of medical debt for covering 9,000 Americans. It cost them $60,000 to do it, and then they just wrote it all off. And
did you reference any law or something? Or if I did a search on John Oliver, would I be able to get to something?
Well, I mean, the law is they set up their own debt collection agency, which gave them the means and the ability to buy the debt, and once the debt was in their possession, they just zeroed it out. And it was an amazing thing to do. It's gotten global attention to John Oliver in last week tonight. And, I'm one of the people applauding him for doing that. And it also shows, companies that buy and sell debt are literally engaged in the business of slavery, because you have to do what the person who holds that debt says. And it really is a reminder. We are all slaves to this system of private central banking.
Right. And John Oliver, tell you the truth, I'm not familiar with this man. Is he a pretty well-known?
Oh, yes, absolutely. You have to be receiving HBO to see his program, okay?
Okay. All right. Thank you.
All right, let's see. We are seeing a breaking story. There's been some kind of an incident in Israel. Shooters disguised themselves as Orthodox Jews. How do you know they were in disguise? So they're making a big deal out of this, and probably they're going to frame some Palestinian for it so that Israel can go back to doing what Israel loves to do to the Palestinians. Anyway, as I mentioned before, grab that enlistment form for the U.S. military. Have it available to email on your desktop, have paper copies with you, and when you see anybody who says, we have to go to war against whoever, hand them the form and say, fill it out. Let's see you walk your talk. If you really think this is an important thing to do, here's your rifle, here's your parachute, so forth and so on. Okay? And generally, that will pretty much shut them all up. Because it is rather amazing. All these people who are out there screaming for war, but they're still here at home. You don't see them actually going on down and enlisting. That's for other people's children to do. Okay. Yeah, boy, they're making a big deal about this Israel story. Now, getting on back to the war zones, and this is getting a little bit tricky. Russia just sailed one of their attack subs down the English Channel. Now, the English Channel is considered international space, international waters. More about this when we come back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Now, owing to the time difference between here and Europe, we're going to do a little change to our schedule. And so joining us right now is Peter Koenig. And Peter, thank you for spending time with us today.
Thank you, Michael. Glad to be with you.
Well, the reason I wanted to have you on the show is that you've been doing a lot of work and a lot of writing, basically forecasting the coming collapse of the European Union, and I think a lot of people can see the indications. It's definitely straining between the predations of the European Central Bank and this refugee crisis. It does seem that the European Union is not in a very stable condition right now.
Yes, that's the least one can say. But I think it was never really planned as being Europe that is Europe for the Europeans. First of all, if I may, a group of countries that is not bound together by a common constitution is not really sustainable. And second, a common currency, the euro, for this group of countries that has no common constitution, no common political goals, and no joint sovereignty, actually not much sovereignty for individual countries either, and foremost, no solidarity among each other. Such a currency cannot survive. And therefore, the EU, as well as the euro, are bound to collapse. It's a mere question of time. But why do I say this? We shall backtrack maybe for about 60 years to see what actually happens with the European Union. Many people don't know that, or they forgot about it. After World War II in 1946, Churchill already called for a union of European states. Here is what he said in his famous speech at the University of Zurich in 1946. He said, "There is a remedy which would in a few years make all Europe free and happy. It is to recreate the European family, or as much of it as we can, and to provide it with a structure under which it can dwell in peace, in safety, and in freedom. We must build a kind of United States of Europe." Well, then, as today, the UK played the US mole in Europe. And I get back to that further on. Even though the UK was not a part of the Treaty of Rome, they were the instigators of that Treaty of Rome in the international agreement that led eventually to the foundation of the European Economic Community. That was in 1957-58, I believe. This was the first of a string of treaties until 1992. The UK only in January 72 became a member of the EEC, which is the European Economic Community. That's when Washington felt direct membership of their mole was necessary to carry out the necessary influence in the emerging European Union. The more important ones among these different agreements or attempted agreements were the French-initiated European Constitution of 2005. The referendum was defeated by France, the Netherlands, and other countries quickly postponed it or voted to cancel it. And all of this didn't happen by accident. I think the last one who said they would not go and vote on it was the UK, again, not by accident. That stopped the whole process of a constitution. Then later followed the Lisbon Treaty, which was signed in December 2007 and I think became effective at the beginning of 2009. This is, however, not a constitution. It was just a set of rules and guidelines. The only agreement or treaty that binds Europe more or less together is the so-called the Maastricht Treaty of February 1992. It sort of integrated the European community. It is still the most important document laying the groundwork for a common Europe, but already then it fell short of foreseeing Europe as a political federation with common political objectives and goals, governed by principles of sovereignty, and as a federation ought to be. This entire European Union development process, so to speak, demonstrates that there was never a serious attempt to make a politically unified federation of Europe. This would have been too dangerous for the hegemony of the United States. For example, still today, after all the artificially imposed Federal Reserve and Wall Street European crises, the 28 European states combined are economically stronger than the US. But mainstream media would, of course, never touch a subject like that. But in fact, and this is according to the International Monetary Fund, the European GDP is about 19.4 trillion. I think that was at the end of last year, of 2015, 19.4 trillion compared to that of the US with 17.9 trillion. This is respectively 25.4% of world GDP and 22.5%. So there we go. That has not been affected by these continuous crises that beset Europe. For example, the Constitution of the United States covers a federation of semi-autonomous states, but united by solidarity. That's why the dollar as a currency for the US works. That is a fraudulent house of cards for the rest of the world is a different story, but for the US it works. Similarly, the Constitution of Switzerland covers a federation of cantons, little states, each one with a degree of sovereignty, but all united under the principle of solidarity and with common political goals. None of this was the case or was even foreseen for Europe. This was not an oversight. This was error by design. So, for all those who have been doubting, be aware the European Union as it exists today is not an invention of Europeans. It is a construct thought out immediately after World War II by the US, perhaps even during World War, so as to keep Europe under her control. Europe was also to become a buffer zone between the US and the hated Soviet Union at the time. And it worked so far and up to this date. Just see how every day Russia and her leader is being demonized and slandered by the Western media.
Well, they're trying to bring back the Cold War, but those of us who are old enough to remember the original Cold War remember that we were given all these warnings about how evil the Soviets were and everything. Nothing bad ever actually happened, except we all got poorer funding the military-industrial complex. And it was very effective brainwashing. I remember I grew up thinking that the citizens of the Soviet Union were really horrible, and then I actually met some, and by golly, they're just like us.
Exactly. I grew up in that Cold War too, and had the same impression. Every time we were talking at that time in Switzerland or in Central Europe about something bad may be happening, the enemy came always from the east. It was the Soviet Union. But today, and this is now a new Cold War, as you properly put it, and it helps propping up the U.S. military-industrial complex. But frankly, if it wasn't for the foresight and wisdom of President Putin, we Europeans might be, for the third time in 100 years, enmeshed in a world war.
Well, unfortunately, it still may happen because the U.S. definitely does seem intent on kicking off real hot wars, both with Russia and China, in order to reassert the dollar's hegemonic domination over the world economy.
Yes, that is still true. This is a big risk, and many of us are thinking about it and writing about it, trying to warn the people at large. But of course, the mainstream media, they put the blame on Russia and China. And I keep saying, if it wasn't for the chess player Putin, I think we may be already in such a war.
I agree.
But there is of course Obama, and he has an agenda, and there is a big risk that before the election, or maybe just after the election, he may enter a war. And there are lots of people who think like that, and I think it is a possibility. I rather prefer, though, positively that he may not be able to do it, but that it is a risk, no doubt. There's, of course, other items which are on his agenda is the what is it called, the TPP, with
yes.
the trade agreement with Asia. And then for Europe, the nefarious TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. And this is accompanied by something perhaps even worse and less talked about, which is the TISA agreement, the Trade in Service Agreement, which means that in fact there are about 50 countries are involved in it all over the world. Well, mostly Asia and Europe, and of course the US. I think exactly 50 countries. That would mean that under this TISA agreement, all the services, and that means social services, that means health, pension funds, social security, and I guess all social services which are life-supporting services like water and sanitation could be easily privatized. And that would be really detrimental for the world, especially for the poor. And then you mentioned before, look at the so-called refugee crisis. It's also a crisis by design.
Yes.
And by design, I mean, it was designed to increase unemployment in Europe, to lower production costs and standards of living. Washington's idea is to make Europe a high-tech, low-cost colony, a slave yard for the empire, I would call it. Germany has absorbed last year about 1 million refugees. And these refugees, they were planned to come all in the winter months, in the fall and winter months, when it was most difficult and most complicated for Europe to absorb them. The cold weather, rain, and so on came on. So Erdogan was paid to keep them in camps, which I have heard costs of $6 to $8 billion, refugee camps, quite modern refugee camps that can house about 4 million refugees. I've seen aerial pictures of them. So he was paid to keep them there until the signal came from Washington to let them go. And that signal came last September, October, and then they came. There's so many that died in the Mediterranean Sea, but all the others, they came and flooded Europe. And that was a crisis in itself in Europe, and particularly in Germany, because everybody wanted to go to Germany. Actually, they had roadmaps.
Yes.
Many of them were prepared. I saw some of them because I went with another journalist. I went to Greece, to Kos, and to Turkey, to see these refugees and how and where they camp and how they plan to come across. And some showed us a roadmap where they were actually told you have to go to Germany, and this is the way to go to Germany. And Germany will receive you, they will house you, they feed you,
yes.
They take care of your sick children and family. It's amazing, But I wonder, since we're talking about this, and since you brought it up, and you obviously know about it, I wonder whether people in Brussels know this.
I think they do. I'm sure that they do, because I think another reason for the refugees going into Europe and the same situation with the flood of illegal immigrants into our country, I think those who are trying to build a single global government, the New World Order, are literally trying to erase our sense of a regional, cultural, historical identity to make it easier to control us, and literally try and take all these different races of people and blur them all together. Unfortunately, it's backfiring because of elements of human nature that are not subservient to legislation. So I think that's another agenda that's definitely at work there. But you're absolutely right. They need to drive down wages and salaries. The New World Order cannot come into existence until every single nation is equally poor. And that means taking the developed, industrialized nations and literally sabotaging their economy and industry until they're living like, the poorest third world nation you can imagine. And then they can drop the borders.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And as of Brussels knowing it, yes, I think you're also right. Some of them do, but the Brussels organization, this complex of the European Union and the European Commission, you have the Parliament, and I think most of the elected European parliamentarians, they have not a clue, really there. However, there are some members of the European Commission. The European Commission, as you probably know, is totally unelected. They are appointed members, and they make the decision. They are really playing the game. And I think some of them, if not all of them, they really know what's going on. So they're playing with 500 million European citizens. And I believe strongly, I very strongly believe they have been bought, or if they were not able to be bought, then they were threatened.
Well, they're not appointed until that they show they're on board with the globalist agenda, because the plan was form a European Union, form the North American Union, then join those together, and bit by bit, build up a single global government. Of course, the flies in the ointment remain those nations who don't want to be part of a global society, such as Russia and China.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the question, of course, comes up, why do the Europeans allow this? Simply because they really don't know what's going on. And especially, they look at the organization of the technocratic European Union, and they have about 17 subcommissions in addition to the European Commission that we know about, those who call the shots. It's so complex that only few people really understand it. But precisely because of this, people are getting more and more upset, and many want to get out of it. I would say that if there was a general poll taken today, that more than half of the Europeans, perhaps as many as 2/3 of the European citizens, would like to get out of the European Union.
I'm seeing numbers even higher than that. I mean, as you know, we're coming up on the Brexit vote, and newspapers like the Telegraph and the Express and the Daily Mail are polling their readers, and they're getting numbers as high as 80% wanting to get on out. Anyway, listen, we need to take a 3-minute break for commercials, and we'll be back here with Peter Koenig talking about the collapse of the European Union after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're still talking with Peter Koenig about the coming collapse of the European Union. We're going to have him for about another half an hour. So if you have any questions about the European Union, feel free to call at 800-313-9443. So, Peter, we've covered the refugee crisis, which is putting a tremendous amount of social stress. We know that the open borders, which was one of the big attractions of the European Union, those are now going away. Schengen is coming to an end. And from the point of view of the European people, the EU deal is becoming more and more all downside with little, if any, upside whatsoever. And certainly a big part of this is fueling support for the Brexit, because for the British people are just seeing billions and billions of pounds and euros sucked out of the British economy, and all they're getting back for it are really nitpicking regulations about all aspects of their lives, and of course the flood of refugees.
Yes, you're absolutely right about Brexit. There is actually there's an enormous amount of information which the opponents of the European Union have collected and have put in YouTubes and in films for the rest of Europe to see, because many of them affect the rest of Europe. And so they are having an impact way beyond the UK border, which I think is excellent, which is very good. But the thing there is that I still do not believe that the Brexit will happen, and that you said there are 80% of the people, maybe there are as many as 80%. There's a majority who would like to get out. But Obama just doesn't allow it. He has given Cameroon very strict instructions to make sure that the Brexit doesn't happen. And once the U.S. says something is going to happen or should not happen, they just bend all the rules to make it stick. So an election, for example, or a referendum like this one, even if there's a majority who wants to get out, there will be ways and means to manipulate that so that it doesn't happen.
Well, we certainly saw that with the Scottish independence referendum. They weren't even trying to hide the election fraud up there. And, of course, right now the entire world is laughing at how obvious it is that our current presidential election cycle is crooked. It's wide open crooked. And there's also the possibility, and I even saw an article about this in the British media the other day, where even if the Brexit vote wins, Parliament is not actually under an obligation to go along with that. Their attitude could be, well, we've listened to the will of the people, but we know what's best, and you're going to go on being slaves to the European Central Bank until you die.
Exactly. That's exactly the kind of manipulations that I was thinking about. So, because it is very clear to most Europeans that if Brexit happens, then that's the end of the European Union. You know,
there's all these other countries. Denmark is going to have a referendum now. France is talking about leaving. Germany is not going to be happy about being the last healthy economy holding up the EU if Britain leaves. And so, yeah, it could shatter the whole EU, and their New World Order dreams could come crashing down. I'd love to see it. We have to take about a minute break here for our top of the hour station ID. We'll be back with Peter Koenig and the collapse of the EU. We've got a caller waiting on the line after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. We're talking with Peter Koenig about the coming collapse of the European Union, and we have a caller waiting on the line. John in Barbados. Aloha. Welcome to the show. Do you have a question for Peter?
Yes, Peter. Peter, I don't know whether you've noticed, but the European citizenry seem to be fighting against this agenda. I mean, if you look at the British newspapers, for example, all the comments in the comment sections of these articles are actually anti-European, anti-integration, and it's so much so, that the newspapers have started limiting the comments and censoring the comments. And as for this thing spat with Russia, if you look at the comments, particularly in the British papers, they're more supportive of Putin than they are of Cameron.
Yes, of course, that doesn't surprise me, and I've also seen some of it, and that just feeds into what we were talking about before. The majority, not only in Britain, but the majority of Europeans are against the European Union. They're so fed up with this bureaucracy and with the corrupt bureaucracy that they would like to get out, and there are ways to get out. I mean, it's not the end of the world. You know, so many people, including Greece. I don't quite understand why Greece hasn't opted out at the very beginning when they were being strangled by the so-called Troika, by the IMF and the European Commission and the European so-called central bank, which isn't really a central bank. That they haven't decided to just go back to their drachma and to their local currency and do what Argentina has done in 2001. Start afresh. You know, it takes a while, but the way they are now indebted, it will take them generations if they don't leave the European Union. And eventually, when it collapses, obviously, then there is no chance that they have to suffer through that debt crisis. But yes, you're right. The majority wants to get out, and the Brits want to get out. And the Brits have done a great job in collecting a lot of information that is against the European Union, not only in Britain, but also for Europe. And but as we said before, you know, it will be very, very tough because Obama doesn't want to let that happen, because Obama wants Europe as a slave state or as a new colony. And therefore, as Mike indicated, even if the majority of the people vote for Brexit, then there is still possibility of manipulating it and ways of cheating. And one of the official ways is that the Parliament has to vote on it, and the Parliament says, well, we vote against what the people wanted, and we stay in the European Union because we think it's better for us. It's pretty much actually what happened in Greece. You know, Tsipras has promised the referendum. And the referendum overwhelmingly was for Greece not to accept the austerity package that was in last July. And so this was a big step for the people because they didn't know what happened, but they were daring and they voted, I think, 2 to 3 or 3-2 for against the package, which would have meant leaving the European Union or at least the euro. And then Tsipras turned around and accepted the package, and even worse. So, because the parliament voted against the people, and the parliament was forced to vote like that, So the same thing could happen in the UK.
Well, they can only get away with that so many times.
At least we have a different currency, the pound. So we're not involved in this euro nonsense. But what I'm looking at is a famous Kennedy referral. You know, if peaceful resolution of grievances becomes impossible, then violent resolution of those grievances was inevitable. And I think we're descending into that level.
Yeah, we very much are. And actually, the words Kennedy used was revolution. Those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. And I think that if the British people vote for a Brexit and Parliament goes the other way, there are going to be a lot of people in London wondering, you know, if that large wooden block over at the Tower of London is still usable.
Yes, I think you're right. And I think indications for that, maybe from another, seen from another angle, we are seeing now in France playing out.
Yes. I mean, this is the largest mass uprising in France since the French Revolution. And it doesn't show any signs of abating. Everybody understands that when the bankers say austerity, what they're saying is you must make do with less so we can have more, and that's a very tough sell.
Exactly.
The French, if you like, resistance is getting really serious when all the nuclear power workers go on strike, and they're going to have to shut down these nuclear power stations, and that will deprive France of a lot of its electricity supplies.
Well, theoretically, the managers could step in. And also, I need to take a moment here to welcome back to our show all of our on-air broadcasters who don't join right at the top of the hour. And you don't have to get nervous. We didn't talk about anything really important while you were gone, so you don't need to feel bad. But for those of us just now joining the program, we're talking with Peter Koenig about the coming collapse of the European Union, and we're taking a phone call from John in Barbados. So we were talking about how we're seeing signs of discontent all across Europe, the anti-austerity protests in France, the growing anger in Greece, and basically this idea that the European Union has been a raw deal for everybody except Brussels and the European Central Bank and the IMF and the World Bank, who are profiting handsomely off of all this chaos and turmoil.
Well, I see people leaving the EU in large numbers now. I mean, I left the UK coming up 14 years ago because I could see all this nonsense coming through. And I moved to the Caribbean. And lots of people are doing the same thing, particularly out of Britain. There's a lot of immigration, but the sovereign people, the citizens of Britain, are moving out in record numbers.
Yes, you see, this is a phenomenon that actually happens throughout Europe. You're right, and this happened. That started to happen with the Balkanization of Yugoslavia, and now the term Balkanization has become a generic word for whatever is going on. The whole Middle East is being Balkanized, and these people they have lost their homes, their economy, their country. Their education system, they have nothing really left in their homes, so they leave. I mean, Iraq and particularly now Syria, they're master examples of people leaving. I think about 4 million people have left so far, have left Syria. Most of them to Europe, some of them to other Middle Eastern countries, but people asking themselves, where can we go? So eventually they end up in the hangman's pen. Can you believe? They come to Europe, they come to the hangman actually to ask him for mercy, and to give him work and shelter and food. And this is something so absurd that you ask yourself, where are eventually the Europeans going? And you just said it. You left the UK, the Europeans, where do they go? And the Americans eventually too, because in the US the situation is not much better than in the US, than in Europe, probably worse for the Americans. There's a lot of poverty, and there's maybe even less knowledge or awareness of what's going on. But many Americans say, we would like to leave. Where do we go?
We're running out of places to go to.
Pardon me?
We're running out of good places to go to.
Exactly. I would have just said until not too long ago, Latin America was a prosperous place where you could go. No more. Latin America, the revolution of Latin America that has happened during the last 15, 20 years has been just erased by the U.S. and by the trickery of the New World Order within a year, basically, so to speak. So what's left? Migrating to Russia and to China, perhaps that's the future. And I wouldn't rule it out. But to continue living in this mess, in this total hegemony of a small elite, is just unbearable, and it's getting worse. And I think we are far from the peak in 2016.
Yeah, I'm afraid you're right because private central banking as an economic system is inherently unstable. You cannot get it to perpetuate indefinitely sooner or later because it always manufactures more debt than money with which to pay the debt. The debt will overwhelm the system and bring it crashing down. And because of globalism, that is now getting ready to happen in all of these nations with private central banks all at the same time. And it may be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to hit the reset button and start all of these economies on the principle of no more privately owned central banks being given a counterfeiting license to create money out of thin air and loan it to the public at interest, because it's not good for the nation, it's not good for the people, it's great for the bankers, it's a system of enslavement, and people are starting to wake up and realize it's a system of enslavement.
That's true, and the epitome of a private central bank is the Fed. Federal Reserve.
Yes.
There's not one shred of national interest in the Fed. It's owned by the Rothschilds, by the Rockefellers, by the Morgan Stanleys, by these few families. There are about maybe 7 or 8 families that own this Federal Reserve. There was a time when you could find the owners on internet, no longer. But those that they actually have created out of the dollar but I believe it was 1913, when the Fed, the new Fed was created and the dollar system was created. They have created a pyramid system, a Ponzi scheme actually,
yes,
that is based on debt, as you just described it before, debt and interest. And to pay the interest, you create new money. And only when you have a central system, a central bank that is privately owned, and not only privately owned, but also has a currency that de facto serves as the world reserve currency, and serves as the currency that still today is used for most hydrocarbon, oil and gas trading. You are free to print as much money as you can. Greenspan was, when he was boss of the Federal Reserve, he was asked once by a journalist, and that was many, many years ago, how in the hell are you going to pay back this enormous debt of the U.S.? He said, we don't have to pay back the debt. We just print new money. And he couldn't have been more clear and more blunt and more correct. That's exactly what's happened.
Wouldn't it be wonderful if ordinary people could just print up the money to pay their debts instead of waiting for John Oliver to do it for them?
Exactly. And so the rest of the world is actually carrying this debt. Now the Eastern system, Russia and China, they have come together. They have a monetary union. They have also a defense union, but the monetary union is much stronger. They're building on that. They have they have already created for internal trading and trading within the CEO, which is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which includes most of Central Asia and also, of course, China and Russia. And then the BRICS, and I think you can almost forget for now the B of the BRICS, but
yes,
they're still there. They're also part of it. And newly joined this group of countries have Pakistan. Well, India was part of the BRICS, or is part of the BRICS. Pakistan and Iran is about at the point of joining. Now, if you put all of that together, you have about half of the world population, and you have about 1/3 of the world's economic output, of the world's GDP. Now, if they design, and this is going on, I know that personally from sources in China. This is going on, and will eventually be released. I don't know how fast, or whether it will be released in one step, probably not, or in several steps, so that other countries can join. They already have within their trading system abundant the dollar-linked SWIFT. This also privately owned, Belgium-based international exchange system, which almost all monetary transfers have to use. For example, if I simply want to send $1,000 to Spain from Switzerland, it doesn't just go from a Swiss bank to a Spanish bank. It goes via SWIFT through a Wall Street bank. This is the system. It goes through a Wall Street bank, either in London or in New York, and then it goes to the Spanish bank. So the money is totally controlled through the US dollar system. That's why it's possible to impose sanctions. That's why it's possible to apprehend money from other countries in anywhere in the world, and people are sick and tired of it. So I think if that happens, if this system, this Eastern system, opens up, many countries, even though they may lose a lot of money for the moment, and I mean a lot of dollar reserves, will jump onto this other boat. This is a big possibility, and I would welcome it. I would welcome it, despite the fact that there will be probably a downturn of the world economy. But the good side about that is that about 15 years ago, if I remember correctly, about 15 years ago, around the year 2000, there were still about 85 to 90% of worldwide country reserves in treasuries were held in US dollars, dollar denominations. By now, this figure has dropped to below 60%. And it is close to 50%. It obviously fluctuates with the value of the dollar, and the value of the dollar, as you know, can be manipulated at will.
Yes.
So but when it drops below 50%, then it becomes dangerous. Then actually countries may say, "Hey, the dollar is not safe anymore. We jump onto other currencies," and that may bring a rapid collapse. And that would also bring probably a rapid collapse of the world economy, which is of course not desirable either for Russia, China, and of course not for the US, and for Europe, for none of the countries that hold dollars in their reserves. But something like that is bound to happen. And actually, a Brexit or another exit of a European country may trigger such a phenomenon.
Okay, well, listen, we're I'm sorry to cut you off. We're almost to the end of the break, and I know you need to take on off. We've got about 2 minutes left here. Do you have a website or a book that our listeners should be trying to find?
On purpose, I don't have a website, but I have a book out which was published in 2008. And it is still very much up to date. I was thinking of maybe putting some new figures into it. It's called Implosion. And it talks exactly about what we are talking about the collapse of the Western monetary system. It has been written based on my many years of World Bank experience around the world. And it is written as a novel. I call it an economic thriller. I'm
looking at it now on Amazon, and I'm going to post this link to WhatReallyHappened.com so that people can log in and buy this book.
Okay, that would be very nice. Thank you very much.
All righty. All right, do you have anything else you want to share with our listeners?
Well, I just wish them all well. I wish us well that we will live through this crisis, and I really do hope that we go back. I think one of the motives and modes, I would say, how we can get out of it is deglobalizing and going back to, or jumping forward, fast forwarding to a system where we work as local production for local markets with local currencies.
I agree.
And with local banks.
Absolutely.
And that will help us to get out of this mess and become sovereign countries again, where we can build on solidarity between each other, between groups of people, between groups of regions, and between groups of nations. And that eventually may bring us to perhaps another European Union.
All right. Well, we have to let you go now here, Peter. We've got to take a commercial break. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And now, as I was mentioning before, we had to go to our guest. Oh, first of all, quick little comment. For those people who are trying to track down John Oliver last week tonight and his segment on debt, it is on YouTube. Comedy Channel puts all of these segments on YouTube, and you can search for it. I just linked it to the front page of WhatReallyHappened.com. And it is an amazing look into just how predatory our economic system is on people, where they're literally buying and selling your debt obligations. They're buying and selling your slavery. That's the whole point of debt, is to make you a slave. It's a system of enslavement. It's a system of governance, and it is illegitimate. It's no more legitimate than rule by divine right or rule by slavery. And like those former failed systems, it only works as long as you allow yourself to be brainwashed into thinking that's the way the world is supposed to be. And we all need to become banker heretics. No, these bankers will not rule our lives. Period. End of discussion. All right, getting on back to the wars. Russia sailed one of their fast attack submarines down the middle of the English Channel. Now, the English Channel is considered international waters. Even at that narrow point, there's a channel down the middle that is considered international waters, and that's where Russia's submarine was. And American subs go up and down the English Channel, and Spanish, whoever's got submarines, they go up and down there all the time, rather than sail around the outside of the British Isles. But for some reason, because it was Russia, we're going to put on a big show. And NATO had Navy assets going on down there, going to find that Russian submarine. As it turned out, it wasn't really trying to hide all that much anyway. And Russia's defense ministry is saying, okay, this is a little overboard. We weren't doing anything aggressive. We're just sailing around the ocean like everybody else with the Navy is doing. But they're looking for an excuse to say Russia did something bad that justifies an invasion. And we all need to be on the lookout for a false flag. Let's grab a phone call. Clinton, Las Vegas. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike, I want to know, did you have a chance to see Trump's speech from last night?
No, I didn't actually. I had something else that I was involved with that was a lot of work, and I didn't get to see it. I just looked at the primary results and all the reports about election fraud, and that was basically it.
Okay, I haven't found it on YouTube. I was going to send it to you, but Alex Jones played it over and over this morning, and it was something to behold. I saw it last night, and he specifically went after, and he said that Sanders was cheated out of the nomination. He
Good
said
for
the
him.
system is rotten.
Yes.
He went into the Clinton Foundation. He said these people have, what was the quote again? They have made enrichment from personal enrichment from political life into an art form. He said that and she was running all this business from the foundation on an illegal server that he says she should be in jail for. And he was going to make a major speech next Monday on the whole breakdown of the Clinton crimes. And he said, and he followed up with, I wonder if the mainstream media will be there to be interested in seeing it.
Well, the corporate media, we don't call them mainstream anymore because we're now the mainstream here.
We know that.
Okay. The corporate media won't be there because they're fully on board with protecting Hillary Clinton and putting her in the White House, even with all of her criminal background, because after all, she's a woman and it's time to have a woman president. Blah, 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 blah. Certainly, we'll all be paying attention. And here's something that, the Democrats are cheering. We stole the nomination for Hillary Clinton. Huzzah, huzzah, huzzah. Okay, here's the problem. The Democratic Party is now welded to Hillary Clinton.
Yep.
And now that they've committed to a candidate is when you're going to see all the Republican operatives and the independent media and Donald Trump's people are going to start uncorking on Hillary Clinton for all the crimes in the past. Because when Hillary Clinton goes down, it's going to wreck the Democratic Party as badly as the GOP was wrecked when Nixon went down. We got to take a break for commercials and.
Can I?
All right, stay on hold. I'll come back to you after the break. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We got a bunch of callers waiting on the line. Let's go back to Clinton, Las Vegas. Clint, you had something else you wanted to say.
Yeah, this came from Roger Stone, one of Trump's guys. He said one of his options with the Clinton Foundation is he can sue the foundation because he's a donator of the foundation under the impression he was given to a charity, and he can actually have his lawyers.
That gives him standing to sue. Sick him, Donald.
Yeah.
Okay?
Hello?
Yes,
Yeah, that'll do it.
All right, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Mandy in New York. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I've been following that story coming out of Tel Aviv, the shooting.
Yes.
And I had the same impression that you did. They said witnesses saw two men dressed as Orthodox Jews. And I thought, how do they know? That's implying that they were in costume, that they were disguised as Orthodox Jews. How do they know that these are men disguised as Orthodox Jews when an investigation hadn't even occurred yet? It was, breaking news within minutes. And it's just really suspicious because there have been terrorist attacks committed by Hasidic Jews in Israel.
Yeah, there's a lot of stress and tension between the Orthodox and the Ashkenazi. It is amazing for a group that, is always screaming about racism, but they're very racist themselves, even within their own subsects of being Jewish.
Right, and there was that stabbing at the gay parade that was, I believe, an Orthodox Jew.
Yes.
And then you also have the stabbings that happened back in October of 2015, where, there are Ashkenazi Jews who are European, there are the Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews who are Arab. A lot of them look Palestinian, and a lot of those are what they call the cousins of the Palestinians. And you had, in the news, there were the stabbings where Jew and Jew were stabbing each other because they thought the other was an Arab. So it's really just crazy and convoluted, but it does really look suspicious that they knew right away they were dressed or costumed as Orthodox Jews. And somebody else brought up really quickly that I was having a conversation on Facebook, and somebody brought up what day today is, the USS Liberty anniversary. And it's,
how very convenient for Israel that they can cry victim, victim, victim again on the very day that we stand up and say, hey, you shot up one of our ships, you murdered a lot of our servicemen, you shot up the life rafts when they were trying to escape, and then you turn around and claim that it was just all because the weather was bad.
Absolutely. That was the point that he was making. So that's just what I wanted to bring up, Mike.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for that. Anything else?
I was wondering if you know about the ringworm children of Israel.
Yes, it's another huge scandal where basically it was an extermination campaign, a sterilization campaign, and what happened to those kids was as bad as anything Yosef Mengele was rumored to have been doing.
Yeah, and I just wanted to bring that up because, again, just to point out that within Zionism, as you said, there's racism even within that ideology, because Jews, they're not a people. They're all different sorts of people who practice that religion, and they practice it in different ways. There are multiple ethnicities and different cultures. So it's just interesting for anyone listening to look up that part of their history in Israel, the ringworm children and the radiation poisoning.
Yeah, that was very, very ugly. All right, Mandy, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to switch over to Steve in California. Steve, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, one of your callers called in and talked about with the Trump speech, and I think that's pretty interesting. The Trump card he's pulling right now. What he says is all accurate about the crimes of the Clinton family, Hillary Clinton, and the foundation all. But it's an interesting thing that he can pull that out and use that because she's not going to sue him for defamation of character. That would just highlight the actual trial and bring out the truth that, yeah, they're dirty people. So
that's an interesting fact. Hillary cannot sue Donald Trump because then he can bring into court the available evidence and not just have, a bunch of online shills saying, oh, that's a lie, that's a lie, that's a lie, that's a lie. We've got the official FBI report showing the fraudulent manufacturing of Lisa Foster's testimony. We have Dr. Hout's report about the second wound to Vincent Foster's neck, and it goes on and on. And we certainly have got Hillary Clinton dead to rights on Title 18, Section 793. She's guilty, 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 guilty. And she should be in handcuffs already if we had a justice system.
Right. Now, that's a pretty good move. I like it. Thanks a lot, Michael.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go. Okay, the phone lines are clear. Now, yesterday we were talking about how Ban Ki-moon over at the United Nations knuckled under the pressure and removed Saudi Arabia from the UN's list of regimes that are targeting and harming children. And it turns out there was a logistical reason, because now that Saudi Arabia is no longer on that list, the U.S. can now send them armed helicopters from Boeing, armed with Hellfire missiles. So that was the real reason they wanted to get them off the list, because, hey, we're going to give them helicopters, we're going to give them Hellfire missiles. And, the Hellfire missile used on personnel is a very bloody affair. They're not really intended as anti-personnel weapons. They're anti-armor. And you fire one of those into a market square, you're going to kill a huge number of people in a very, very painful way. Now, here's an interesting article. This is from Russia Insider. Is Saudi Arabia about to witness a soft coup d'etat? And they're talking about the growing political instability, the angst within the government over the current king's mental state, the vying for power and control by the heirs to the throne, and, of course, the growing realization that the United States, for whom Saudi Arabia has been a loyal supporter in the Middle East for decades, is about to turn and stab Saudi Arabia in the back and drop the blame for 9/11 on them. And we know that sooner or later the U.S. is going to stage a coup d'etat in Saudi Arabia to make sure there is a friendly U.S. puppet ruler running that country. Because Saudi Arabia, because of the huge amount of money they've invested in the United States, that gives them a lot of influence and a lot of independence because of the threat of simply taking their money back out. And the U.S. doesn't like that one tiny bit. Now, over in China, there's been another one of these incidents where a U.S. reconnaissance airplane was caught flying very, very close to Chinese territory, and the Chinese set up a couple of fighters, to basically say, you have gone far enough. And the U.S. is out there saying, this is unsafe, this is unsafe. Well, if you're worried about safety, what are you doing in that part of the world? Keep the plane safe, keep the crews safe, don't let them take off on these missions. And now we have John Kerry is out there saying that China should not set up an air defense zone over those islands, that it would be provocative. This is coming from the same U.S. government that declares no-fly zones all over the world. Well, if it's okay for the United States to declare no-fly zones over countries and territory it does not own, it should be acceptable for China to set up a no-fly zone over their own territories. Because at the end of World War II, there was an agreement reached, the Cairo Convention, in which the U.S. government said, yes, these islands belong to China. Period. End of discussion. Now, Netanyahu is up there in Moscow, and he is trying to ask Vladimir Putin to tell the Russian Air Force to let Israeli planes fly freely in both Syrian and Lebanese skies. As you know, Israel just went in and bombed the Syrian army earlier today. No word on whether Putin is going to go along with that. My Kopek is he's going to say politely and firmly no. But of course, this has to be making Washington, D.C. very nervous, that Netanyahu is realizing the U.S. is this hollowed out husk that's already been bled dry for anything it can provide to Israel, and now he's turning over to Russia. We're seeing a lot of governments turn toward Russia. And the U.S. is already trying to buy its way back into Netanyahu's good side. Susan Rice is out there promising Israel the largest military aid package in U.S. history. Don't fret about all those homeless and hungry American citizens that are sleeping in alleys and eating out of trash cans. Let's not worry about all these kids who can't afford to go to school and the rest of it. No. We're going to take America's tax money and we're going to give Israel the largest military aid package in U.S. history so they can go on killing their neighbors. Now, over in France, and this gets back to what we were talking about with Peter Koenig, there's a pivot going on. Jean-Pierre Raffarin, the French Prime Minister, and currently a senator, has said that it is inconceivable that France in the future is not going to be in dialogue with Russia. And as a matter of fact, the French Senate just adopted a resolution to scale down the anti-Russian sanctions. Now, there's going to be a big stink about that, because the U.S. is going to come back and say, no, you do the sanctions we tell you to do. But I'm sure those senators are looking out the windows right now at those rioting crowds in the streets of France and realizing that there are still a lot of those old guillotines locked up in various basements around. It's just going to take one spark, and you're going to see the entire European Union erupt. That's how close it is. Now, talking about the economy, there's an interesting spin on what's going on with the Federal Reserve. This is from Blacklisted News. And I'm going to tell you up front, I don't actually agree with this, but it's worth commenting on anyway. And the gist of this story is that the Federal Reserve's bizarre behavior makes sense if the Federal Reserve is out to destroy the U.S. economy to make way for the truly global system. And yes, the U.S. economy has to be seen as less desirable to what will be offered as the global economic system, but I think there's a little bit of a problem. Private central banks have ruined every single nation enslaved to them. And I don't think the people of planet Earth are going to be all hot and bothered to be slaved to a new single planetary private central bank. I don't think that's really going to play in Peoria. What we need are for these private central banks to go away. They have enslaved and looted the human race for 300 years. They are insanely wealthy. But of course, in typical money junkie fashion, it's never going to be enough. Now, there's another article coming on out here. This is from Sputnik News, talking about America's fake recovery. And they're basically going down the list of how Barack Obama has made the publicized indicators of the economy look better by simply redefining certain categories and groups of people and business transactions. And we know this has been going on. It's an election year. The government and the corporate media are out there to try and hand the incumbents another term in office, for which the incumbents will be insanely grateful. But this article's going on down and just showing all the cases where Obama made the economic indicators look better just by changing the definitions. And of course, the biggest one of all is that unemployment number. Because we have, and now it's gone over 100 million Americans willing and able to work who have not been able to find work for months and indeed years. But by redefining them to another category, they're not included in calculating that unemployment number that you see in the corporate media. That's 5-6%, something like that. That represents basically the number of people who lost their jobs in the last week or so and are collecting some form of unemployment insurance. And after that runs out, they go to the other category, to be disappeared. You know, we're not going to talk about the 100 million Americans out of work here. You know, oh, no. We're just going to flood the nation with refugees and illegal immigrants, and everything's just going to work out so well. And no, it isn't. Puerto Rico has apparently decided to go the odious debt route and declare that much of the debt they are currently holding is in fact odious and therefore non-collectible. And this is a principle everybody needs to keep in mind, because this is a recognized principle in international law. when a government goes into debt, there are only certain portions of it for which the people are really liable, especially when that government collapses. When the government borrows money for good schools, hospitals, bridges, yes, we are liable for that and should pay for that. When a government borrows money for war, to give to other countries, to give to their cronies, to engage in espionage against the people and the violation of their freedoms and rights, that's odious debt. And no, we're not responsible for that. The people of Greece are trying to get half of their debt that was created through fraud between Papandreou and Goldman Sachs declared as odious. But of course the attitude they're getting from the IMF and Christine Lagarde is debt is holy, debt is sacrosanct. We don't care if your government cheated you. You owe us that money and you will give it to us or bad things will happen to you. Interesting little story. Apparently over in Goldman Sachs' Japanese office, they hired this cute little young lady, and they were about to hire her. Then they discovered she had starred in adult videos when she was going through college, rather than take out student loans, I guess. And so they've withdrawn the job offer from her, saying that she violated Goldman Sachs' code of ethics when she starred in these X-rated movies. And I am absolutely shocked. I cannot tell you how shocked I am. Goldman Sachs actually has a code of ethics? Here we have an institution that admits looting and plundering the wealth of the world, and they're going to get their knickers in a twist because of a cute little girl who took her knickers off. Talk about hypocrisy and double standards. No, we did not post pictures and videos when we put that article up at WhatReallyHappened.com. You're all a bunch of dirty-minded perverts out there. By the way, speaking of perverts, yet another postscript on that story about the TSA. Apparently this panty-snatching, sniffing behavior is widespread, and they get away with it. Most women are simply too embarrassed to ever report that it's happened. And, Claire didn't file a report. But like I said, we were in the department store telling the story to the store clerk. The lady right behind us in line said, yeah, they did it to me too. What a bunch of sickos work for the United States government. From the TSA crotch sniffers all the way up to Hillary Clinton herself. It's just amazing how bad it really is. All right, we're going to come up here on another commercial break in a few minutes. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. 800-313-9443. We've got about another hour and 5 minutes to spend together, and I hope you'll spend some of that with me. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about the economy. Interesting little article over in Wall Street Journal, and a lot of people have been saying pretty much the same thing. Looking at the student loan issue versus the available jobs on graduation. Kids who borrowed to go to college are actually worse off than kids who just entered the job market right out of high school. The jobs are not there to pay those loans back. College is not about education anymore and bettering yourself. It's about indoctrination sold on credit to permanently enslave you to the bankers. And that is the reality. Going to college may not be desirable for a lot of people in the next generation. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Steve in Arizona. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. My wife and I were wondering about the so-called meteorite that people saw, the bright light and all that.
Yes.
We thought it looked a lot like maybe part of the one of those THAAD missile shots that may have gone out of control. We've seen them, shots from White Sands before, and they're not as curly-cued as that one. And we were thinking that all those curly-cues were a result of one that got out of control.
Yeah, I've seen I've seen that pattern in the skies before, because when I lived in Southern California, we used to see launches out of Vandenberg, and they would leave these amazing curly-cue trails in the high atmosphere. So if that image is in fact associated with the meteor, That would certainly explain the no-fly zone declared where it came down, is something got away from them during a test and it crashed.
Yeah. There's a guy, a fellow that's gone out to look for it, Meteorite Man, forget his name, Robert Haig.
Yeah.
In Tucson. I kind of know him. I had him sign one of my sky and telescopes for me. But,
you actually know him?
Yeah.
I would love it if I was trying to connect with him over a separate issue regarding a meteorite.
I don't really know him.
Oh, okay.
I have been in contact with his brother Z. But I was wondering, did he go out to did he really think that was a meteorite, or is he out to prove that the government is?
Well, I'm sure he's looking at it as a meteorite now. The video that I saw of this thing coming down, it did look like a bolide. Of course, security cameras and dash cams don't have much of a dynamic range, so it's a little bit hard to tell. You know, things do run away from these launches, and that would certainly explain the no-fly zone. What'll be interesting is anybody going on in there trying to find meteor fragments if they run into, shall we say, politely, opposition.
Yeah, right, yeah. I was thinking, that THAAD missile is non-explosive impact. It was an impact weapon.
Well, I don't think they put live warheads on the test launches for reasons that should be obvious. Anyway, Steve, thank you very much. We're going to have to let...
I was going to say the Patriot does have an explosive on it, and I was wondering if that
But not during the tests. Not during the tests. Okay, we got to let you go. Thank you for the phone call. We'll be back with hour number 3 after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And we have a caller waiting on the line already. Royce in Washington. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah. Yes, this is Royce.
Yes. You're on the air.
You were talking about the wars that we're having over there in Syria and Iraq and all that, and that they're going under our domain, The reason that we're over there fighting those wars are because we are the proxy army of Israel.
Yes.
And back in King David's time, that whole area through there David was the only king that ever conquered all of Israel.
Well, that's hang on. That's what Israel claims, but there's actually no archaeological evidence to support that story. It's a folk myth at this point. David and Solomon were probably nomadic tribal leaders living in tents. I mean...
So you're saying it's not in the Bible then?
Well, it's in the Bible. That doesn't necessarily mean anything. A lot of things are in the Bible that are not borne out by the historical evidence. Anyway, this is not a show about religion, so thank you very much. We're going to let you go. Get on back here to the economic news. There's a very alarming development. This is being reported from Ray Gano and a couple of other places. We all know there's all this computer hacking and all the rest of this going on. Maybe. We have seen a pattern of financial institutions who get into a cash crunch, shutting off ATMs and payment systems and claiming it's a computer crime. And we've seen that happen a couple of times. Something that is not getting any coverage on the corporate media is the EBT cards. The little food stamp plastic cards are not working and have not been working for a week now. And people who are dependent on those EBT cards, they can't get groceries. And if this continues, are we looking at the beginning of a Venezuela event happening here in the U.S.? We know that one is inevitable. I mean, if Susan Rice is going to give Israel the biggest military gift of all time, they got to take the money from somebody. Those starving Americans, we don't need them anyway. All righty. Now then, getting over to Britain and the Brexit. Last night was the deadline to register to vote in the EU referendum. And for some strange reason, the computer system handling the online registrations broke down. And as a result, David Cameron is considering, he hasn't said he will, but he's considering setting a new deadline because apparently millions of voters were not able to get registered for the referendum. It shows you what can happen until you wait till the last minute. Meanwhile, over in Europe, British expatriates are worried their mail-in ballots are lost. Apparently over in Germany, there was a bit of a snafu where the German postal workers did not recognize British government prepaid envelopes. And apparently these votes got shuffled off to a dead letter office somewhere. So now there's all that confusion. Now, the migrant situation is continuing to deteriorate. Yesterday we were talking about refugees in Italy who were rioting because the rice being given to them for food was overcooked. Apparently, there's an incident where the migrants burned down their own asylum center because nobody bothered to give them the Ramadan wake-up call. Remember, refugees, immigration, it's a filter. You're not getting people who are really representative of those source countries. We know that Turkey is keeping the educated, skilled Syrians inside Turkey, and he's just letting the chaff on through to Europe. And it's showing it. Up in Switzerland, there's been a vote. 70% of the Swiss voters basically opting to pay the European Union fine rather than take in the migrants. They're just going to go ahead and pay the money to Brussels to not have to take in any of the refugees. Now, here's a very disgusting story. This is from ArmstrongEconomics.com. According to Swedish police, 15-year-old girls are to blame for the escalating rape crisis by refugees. All of the gains made by the good parts of feminism have gone away. Remember this, don't blame the victim. Oh, she dressed provocatively. All right, you're not guilty. She had it coming. And they're back to that already. You know, all these rapes are happening. It's not because of the refugees are raping. It's because these 15-year-old girls are, well, they're 15 and they're girls. And that's just driving these Muslim refugees absolutely crazy. Those girls are just asking to be raped. What a ridiculous point of view to take to try and keep the best positive light on the refugee crisis. And by the way, as I mentioned yesterday, we had a listener write in an email saying, you know, we're always talking about the Muslim refugees in Europe. Why aren't we always talking about those Christian illegal immigrants here in the United States? Fair is fair is fair. And I find myself in agreement on that one. Now, as I mentioned in a conversation to somebody earlier today, you know, Hillary Clinton is out there attacking Donald Trump because Donald Trump wants to build a wall to keep out the illegal immigrants, many of whom apparently were part of Hillary's success in California. But back in 2006, there's a video of it. Hillary Clinton in 2006 was out there saying the U.S. needs a physical barrier to keep Mexicans out. And we link to that from WhatReallyHappened.com. So, back in 2006, she was perfectly aligned with Donald Trump's agenda. Now it's today. Now, over at Northumbria University, they're having an equality conference. Huzzah, huzzah, huzzah. But if you are a straight white male, don't bother showing up. You will not be allowed in through the door. Because equality is everybody else except straight white males. You don't count. You're Untermenschen. And we're still seeing all this nonsense about gender identity. Oh, we're not sure who we are. And we had the caller called into the show yesterday about how estrogen-mimicking chemicals in our products may be causing the feminization of a lot of men. And it turns out there's another source. BBC reported back in 2010 on research showing exposure to mercury was basically turning, in this case, ibises, turning them homosexual. with higher and higher exposure to mercury resulting in males being more likely to pair with males. Now just think about that. Think about the mercury-based preservative thimerosal in vaccines. Even if it doesn't give your kid autism, maybe making them gay. Now, I don't have a problem with people being gay. I do have a problem with making them gay in a society that has a significant percentage of people hostile to that idea, all in the name of a fast buck. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Christopher in Santa Barbara, California. Aloha, Christopher. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. Well, I was just looking at the primary results, and I just cannot quite believe that Hillary is getting the support that I see. And
I don't believe it either. I don't believe it either.
Yeah. I'm deeply suspicious of the vote tally after the count. So the local count is good. There's people watching it, but the numbers go out. I've talked to some of the experts, on what happens to the vote, and I'm aware of the potential of George Soros having some influence. He's the part owner in the company that actually tallies the vote, which is a Spanish-based company.
Oh, swell.
I think all that's pretty much the same. Is that correct?
All of these companies are suspect, and again, I want to point you back to a website, blackboxvoting.org, and I imagine this election cycle, Bev Harris is just busier than a one-armed paper hanger, trying to chase down all these complaints. I mean, there's a lot of websites and groups looking into election fraud. They get zero coverage from the corporate media. Bev Harris is the exception. HBO actually did a documentary on her called Hacking Democracy. You need to hunt that down and watch it if you have not seen it.
I haven't seen it, but I have talked to Bev Harris about 6 months ago, just to get her take on it. And her take was that, the local counts are watched, they're okay, and then the numbers go out, and then we don't know what happens. And there seems to be no accountability. There's no way to get any official information on what's happening to those numbers once they leave the counties and states.
That's by design. It's a completely hidden system. You're not allowed to look at it. You're not allowed to see the software inside the machine. It's an absolute invisible system for stealing and manipulating elections. And it is possible to have honest and fair elections. This government will never allow it to come into existence because this government is self-appointed, self-perpetuating, self-anointing, and the last thing they want is democracy.
Yep, that's for sure. Hey, might I take a moment to share with you a strategy I have for Americans to restore a constitutional government?
Sure.
I've got a good one. It's solid.
Go for it.
Okay. Basically, it comes down to one simple factor. The American people are the only ones that can define constitutional intent. Congress can't do it. The court can't do it. And state legislators can't do it. But Article 5 requires that all amendments have constitutional intent. So we've got a bit of a paradox here because legislators are the ones that actually propose and ratify, but they can't define constitutional intent. And what it comes down to is the Ninth Amendment needs to be engaged for us to regain our constitutional republic. And how it is regained is through establishing amongst ourselves that we have the right to prepare for Article 5 and basically create the unity required to control our state legislations in the amendments proposed and those ratified. And I've come down to a simple inquiry that Americans need to share amongst themselves in order to define constitutional intent. This is so simple. There's nothing political about it. It's really law. It comes down to, do you agree and accept that the framers intended for Americans to alter or abolish government destructive to unalienable rights? Now, anybody that's read the Declaration of Independence can see that it states outright in there that we have that right to alter or abolish. But this is about manifesting that right. So there's one more inquiry, and that's where the Ninth Amendment comes in. Do you agree and accept that the framers intended for freedom of speech to serve the purpose of enabling the unity required to effectively alter or abolish? So now we see that the First Amendment is deficient because it does not define a purpose. Now, I've asked a lot of Second Amendment rights people, I'd say, hey, well, you know that your gun has a purpose, either to go hunt some food, to sustain your life, or to protect you and defend
Well,
you.
now, the Second Amendment does include a purpose, the security of a free state.
Right, it does. And so the First Amendment is deficient because it doesn't. But we can see that unity is absolutely vital for the people to alter or abolish and manifest that primary right that's in the Declaration of Independence.
Which is why the government spends so much time trying to split us off against each other, black versus white, and so forth. The problem is, you've made some very, very good points, Christopher, but you're attempting to work within the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, and the Declaration. You're trying to play by the rules against an opposition that thinks the rules do not apply to them. The Supreme Court has arrogated to itself the right to determine constitutional intent, even though it's not actually given that in the Constitution. Okay?
That's true. But my point is that pretty much anybody who has read these documents realizes that the Supreme Court cannot define constitutional intent, and that when 3/4 of the states have 51% of their citizens saying, hey, we need to alter or abolish, that's our first right, and in order to enable that right, we need to see that free speech serves its purpose, and then go ahead and define that purpose as enabling unity. And I don't see that there's actually another way out of this chicken and egg situation, and the chicken and egg also extends to the fact that mass media is never going to share these words that I am sharing with you.
No, they aren't, and there's another reason. You've constructed a very interesting and compelling argument, but it is one that in our soundbite age is probably going to be lost on most people. If you can't get the concept across very, very simply, people are going to be lost. That's why my articles like the 11th Marble work so well. Because
that's why I have a simple inquiry, and I've found that 13-year-old children can agree and accept those two simple facts.
I think you missed what I was saying. Okay, you've made a good argument, but it's one that takes too long to explain in a mass media audience. Anyway, Christopher, we're running out of time. We're coming up to commercial break here, so I'm going to let you go. Thank you very much for the phone call and the information. And we need to avoid going down into minutia because that just sort of blunts, the desire for action and change. You need to keep the concepts simple, and keeping them simple, you will have the greatest amount of support. And if you go down into the minutia, all you're doing is inviting endless arguments in circles that are basically going to use up your time, energy, and your enthusiasm. Apparently, we got a phone call from North Carolina saying that their EBT card system is working just fine. So apparently, it's only a partial blackout in some parts of the country. Getting on back to immigration here, the Russian police are stopping illegal migration from Turkey and Syria into the Russian Federation. If they can do it, why can't we? If they can do it, why can't Europe? Seems like a reasonable question. Very reasonable question. Russia finds and arrests cyber criminals. The U.S. tells you, pay the ransom. From where I'm sitting, Russia's doing a much better job than the U.S. government. It's a shame we couldn't get Vladimir Putin as a third-party candidate in this country. Might actually do this nation some good. Now, do you remember those years ago where the scandal broke about how the Internal Revenue Service was deliberately targeting liberal groups, Tea Party groups, for intrusive scrutiny, and then the evidence was supposed to be on Lois Lerner's email, and oh golly gee whiz, the hard drive has a problem, it got erased, the backup tapes were missing, really they were just here a minute ago. Do you realize how epidemic that's become? I mean, the reason the investigations into Chinagate and all those other Clinton scandals in 1999 went nowhere is because there was a glitch on the White House email server, and 1 million emails subpoenaed by Congress disappeared, and golly gee shuckies, somebody had manually shut off the backup system just before. Gosh darn it, these things happen. Well, they seem to happen an awful lot in Washington, D.C. I'm going to start a GoFundMe project to make a hard drive that you can write to but never read from. The perfect place to store those records you are legally maintained to keep copies of, but would be best not to see the light of day. A write-only memory, that's what we're going to call it. I'll bet you it'd be a wildfire cellar inside that beltway here. Anyway, getting on back to the Internal Revenue Service, it turns out the IRS has finally released the list of all the targets that they were being sicked on. And it turned out to be 426 organizations. There are another 40 that were not released because they opted out being part of the class action lawsuit. But that total of 426 plus the additional unknown 40 is a lot higher than the 298 groups the IRS admitted to back in 2013. The IRS was being used to target political enemies of the Obama administration. And by the way, use of the IRS for that purpose was one of the original articles of impeachment for Richard Milhouse Nixon. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. We're going to go ahead and take a phone call from Chris in Las Vegas. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, aloha, Michael. I was right on board with your previous comments before the break relative to the political prosecution or execution, perhaps, of opposition parties to this administration's revolutionary terrorist feelings towards the American people. Although we have certainly observed strong evidences as supported by your observations relative to the IRS targeting list being far more expansive than originally prognosticated, supposedly. We've seen the same thing with the Department of Homeland Security, and I can make a very strong case that you're seeing evidences that are very clear, crystal clear in fact, that the Obama Army is in fact the agency arms of the Chief Executive's branch. The DOJ, the Bureau of Land Management.
We're certainly see them all being armed up. They're all being turned into, SWAT units. Even the Weather Service, is getting, a SWAT unit. And this is the government arming itself against an uprising by the people. But we know how civil servants work. They're not going to risk their lives to protect their bosses from an enraged American mob. They're going to drop the guns and run like heck. We'll collect them all up and sell them surplus after it's all over under the slogan, never fired, only dropped once.
Well, I think more dangerous to the national security and the public safety is the political polarized opposition to Americans in the court systems. The judiciary has gone full-on rogue. I have a case of my own here in Las Vegas where they have completely denied all statutory and procedural due process, all substantial justice, no trial by jury, unlawful Fifth Amendment takings of private property without a judicial intervention whatsoever in spite of opposition. And it's merely because those that are not represented when they go before their bar courts are at a precise political disadvantage that puts them in a very disabling ability to obtain substantial redress of grievances.
You know something? You're getting into the same territory as Christopher is, where you're trying to talk like a lawyer and impress us all about how much you know, but that's not...
Well, excuse the hell out of me for being knowledgeable. Goodbye.
Okay. We'll switch over here to Stephen in Oregon.
Hi.
Hi.
Hello, Michael.
Yes.
How are you? Aloha, and you brought up the IRS just recently, right?
Mm-hmm.
And all the information that was released?
Yes.
And I was wondering, were they auditing these libertarians?
Well, it was more than audits. They were basically putting roadblocks in the way of their getting tax-exempt status. And they were asking these people for more information than they were legally entitled to have. As you know, over at Ron Paul's group, they were demanding a list of all the donors, which the IRS is not entitled to. That, in fact, it was illegal for them to ask for that, and the IRS is trying to sue as a form of harassment or lawfare against Ron Paul's organization. So it was a pattern of targeted harassment and intimidation.
Were they sending in guys with guns if they did not cooperate?
Well, I guess they were threatening to send in the marshals, but I mean, at the very least, they were going to revoke Ron Paul's the organization's tax-exempt status.
Right. Well, I would say if they are sending in the guys with the guns, that's the very definition of terrorism.
Of course it is.
Right?
The IRS is a terrorist organization.
You bet. Thank you very much.
All right.
And aloha.
Aloha. Thank you very much. We're going to let you go here. All right. We're coming down to the bottom of the hour here. Now, do you remember last week we had this strange situation where a Blue Angels F-18 and a Thunderbird F-16 both crashed? Well, apparently last night, 2 other F-16s had a midair collision over Georgia and crashed. Our military is kind of in like really, really bad shape, isn't it? And Obama thinks we're going to go to war with Russia and China successfully? I don't think so. All right, we've got to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I'm starting to see all these articles popping up about vote fraud investigation initiated. We just put one of them up at WhatReallyHappened.com. But I'm getting them from all over California and other states. And there should be investigations. Our elections are too important to have them be invisible to us. And this idea that voting is supposed to be private, well, that's to help with the secrecy. The election should be verifiable all the way from the individual voter up to the final result. Anything less than that is an illegitimate election. And that's what we've been living with. So long we've gotten used to it. We don't recognize just how fraudulent the whole system has become. All righty, getting on back to the news here. And by the way, I forgot at 6 minutes after, I'm supposed to welcome all of our on-air affiliates back to joining our show. I'm just getting used to that, so I have to set myself a little nag about that. Because we do the first few minutes of this program, they don't get to hear us. So that's where we say all the really good stuff. Now then, speaking of airplane crashes, apparently there is a private detective, Josef Resch, who's been conducting his own investigation into the 2014 crash of Malaysian Airlines Flight 17. And apparently he had collected quite a few documents that shed light on what was going on, and even pointed to a culprit. German and Swiss authorities raided the detective's home and seized all the documents. Probably they will never see the light of day again. When somebody is privately investigating Malaysian Airlines Flight 17 and the authorities come on in and seize all the documents and evidence they've collected, that screams there is a cover-up. And again, my pet theory for what happened is that Putin was returning from a 6-day tour of South America in his presidential jet, which is a converted passenger airliner, nowhere near as grand as Air Force One, I will grant you. But it happens to be painted in the same colors and very similar style to the livery on the Malaysian Airlines aircraft. And from a distance, they could be confused for each other easily. I think somebody went up there intending to assassinate Vladimir Putin, shoot him down, throw the Russian government into turmoil long enough to retake those eastern Ukrainian republics, and they hit the wrong target. And this is backed up by that statement from an airport worker that he'd seen a Ukrainian military jet return with an empty rail and the pilot shaken up saying, "I hit the wrong target, I hit the wrong target." I think that's what's going on. Now, if you are a GPS user, and most of us are, there may be some problems in California because apparently the U.S. military is planning a series of tests that will jam the GPS system all across the area. And it may affect aircraft and those reliant upon GPS. The testing is based at the Navy's China Lake Naval Weapons Center, 150 miles north of Los Angeles. And the testing is taking place on June 9th 21st, 23rd, 28th, and 30th. Now, jamming GPS will blind the American people, and it will blind everybody who is using the U.S. GPS system. But Russia's already put up their own, not wanting to be dependent on the U.S. GPS in the eventuality of war. So, I hope they don't have an unfortunate incident with the GPS being down. Now, we've been talking a lot about this problem of civil forfeiture. We are starting to see some states like New Hampshire rein it in. New Hampshire just passed a law saying that the police cannot seize your property until there is an actual conviction of wrongdoing. But in most states, the civil forfeiture laws are still, the police can take your property if they just suspect it's been used or is about to be used in a crime. It's return to Code Napoleon. We presume you are guilty and you have to prove that you're innocent before you get your property back. Most people never do. Or most people will accept a deal where the police will give them back half their property as long as they promise not to sue and make a big fuss about it. But it just hit a new low at the Oklahoma Highway Patrol. They're carrying a new machine, the Electronic Recovery and Access to Data Machine, known as an EROD, that can scan your bank account, prepaid cards, credit cards, giving the Oklahoma Highway Patrol instant access to the balance and the funds. If the trooper believes the money is tied to a crime, they can literally empty your bank account from there by the side of the road. And all the officer needs to justify doing so is if he feels you're being evasive or defensive. This is highway robbery. This is out and out highway robbery. And I'm going nowhere near Oklahoma. Or for that matter, California. They're all going nuts there on the mainland. Maybe we should stay here in Hawaii. It's a little more sane out here. Now, the United States has now seen 13 months straight of record-setting gun sales. Every time the gun grabbers open their yaps, gun sales go through the roof. As well they should. We all know the real threat to the American way of life. And it's not Al-Qaeda, and it's not ISIS. It's Sodom on the Potomac. We also know crime is going out of control, especially with the influx of illegal immigrants and refugees, many of whom are criminals in their homelands. And because of incidents like what I just said about the Oklahoma Highway Patrol, calling the police, you're in greater danger than facing down the criminal yourself. The police are murdering more innocent Americans than the mass shooters and terrorists put together. They're stealing more from the American people than the burglars, robbers, and muggers put together. Why would anybody call the police? They're not going to be in there in time to actually do any good. They're going to show up after you've already been robbed or raped or whatever, and then they may rob and murder you all over again. It's ridiculous. Okay, Edward Snowden has come out with new information, and it's not really new. Most of us observing this NSA MI5 computer snarfing knew this was going to happen, because the addition of data to a system is linearly additive, but the correlation among all that data is an unlimited expansion. They can collect all that data. They simply don't have the resources to make sense of it, and Edward Snowden has now come on out and confirmed that, saying that MI5 has gathered so much data, it's actually missing life-saving intelligence. I remember when they were talking about the needle in the haystack, and somebody made the observation, you don't pour more hay on there. There is simply too much communication going on the net. They can record it all and collect it all. They can't make sense of it. And they're missing important information, such as the cyber criminals. Another example, up at the University of Calgary in Canada, the administrators have had to pay a $20,000 ransom because their computer systems got hit with ransomware. And they're paying $20,000 to get their files back. Why are we all hot and bothered about ISIS and Al-Qaeda, who are really working for the United States anyway? Why isn't there a war on cybercrime to go with our war on drugs and our war on poverty and the war on the rest of it? Cybercrime is a real problem. It's costing the American people billions of dollars, not just in ransom, but in lost productivity. Everybody's screaming about our gross domestic product not being very good. Well, that's because we're spending a third of our time dealing with hackers and cyber criminals. It is a huge, huge loss, and our government just wants, well, yeah, I don't know, or, we can't do anything about it. Doop-de-doop-de-doop-de-doop. Let's get some of those Russians over here. They just threw 50 hackers in jail. Let's get some people over here who actually know how to get things done, because there isn't anybody in Washington, D.C. that seems to know what they're doing. They're too busy stealing panties out of luggage at the airports. Now, a story coming out of the Electronic Intifada, the cyber attacks on websites supporting the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement have been determined to be coming from Israel. No big shock there. Israel has the highest per capita percentage of cyber criminals of any country on earth. And again, as I said back when we were being hit with our DOS attack, those who resort to these kind of underhanded tactics are basically proclaiming to the world that they know they cannot win their point of view on the facts, logic, and law. So they feel they have to cheat. It's my divine right to cheat and destroy your computer. I have a right to freedom of speech. You don't. You're saying things I don't agree with. Now, earlier in the show, somebody called in talking about the ringworm scandal, and during one of the breaks, I hunted down an article about it. It was a huge scandal. And basically what it was is that Israel's medical establishment was under the guise of trying to cure ringworm, giving very high concentrations of radiation to Jewish Arab and Palestinian Arab children. Now, the medical protocol of the day was half a Röntgen to treat the ringworm. These children were receiving doses of 350 Röntgen. 200 is considered a lethal dose. Some of these kids were given 2 zaps for a total of 600 Röntgen. 6,000 of the victims died within the first year of the treatment. And those who survived have been dealing with cancer, epilepsy, infertility, brain disorders, and inherited genetic abnormalities for their children. So, something to keep in mind about what's going on. Okay, down in Guatemala, apparently they just had a major, major snowstorm. 14 feet in the mountains. And it blocked off a village of a couple of villages. More than 10,000 Guatemalans are now snowbound. Gosh darn, that human-caused global warming. All right, we're going to take a phone call. Richard in New York. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, Mike. Aloha. I was wondering if, after all this mess, you're following the Polynesian Voyaging Society of the Hokulea, which just recently docked in New York.
Yeah, I've been following it. We've been following it for years. Claire and I were able to attend the celebration when the Hokulea arrived from its voyage from Tahiti, and it was a very traditional Hawaiian thing. And it wasn't opened up for the tourists, but we're Kaahumanu, so we went there. I've had the pleasure of being on the Hokulea myself and learning a little tiny bit about Polynesian navigation, and it is absolutely amazing. Partly it's looking at the stars, and they have a wooden disc with these pegs in it, which sort of forms a very primitive astrolabe. They were able to find islands over the horizon by looking at the clouds. And once you learn how that's done, it becomes very obvious. And that allows you to see islands that are out of the line of sight, but you know they're there because of how they're changing the overhead clouds. And also the Polynesian navigators were able to dip their finger into the ocean water and tell roughly where they were just from the salinity, because there are all these different currents across the Pacific, and they all have slightly different levels of saltiness. And between all of this, the Polynesians were crisscrossing the Pacific, regular commerce, 1,000 years before Columbus made his sail across that little tiny pond called the Atlantic, even though he wasn't the first to the North America anyway. The Vikings beat him, the Chinese beat him, and even the Egyptians beat him. They've now discovered that the Egyptian pharaohs were really big on recreational drugs, including cocaine. And in ancient times, just as in modern times, the cocaine does come from Central and South America. And it may very well be that North and South America are the source for the Egyptian legends of Atlantis, because they told Plato it was this faraway land beyond the Pillars of Hercules. And Plato may have blended that with the story of the explosion of Santorini, that huge volcano, and put the two together and said there was this great land out there. We can't find it anymore because it blew up.
Yeah. I've been following Hokulea for over 10 years. And when they started this voyage, I had previously to that, I had built a 1/48 scale model of the first Hokulea. This is the second one.
Yes.
Yes. And I was an Army brat, and I grew up at Fort Shafter, Hawaii.
Oh, okay.
So it's
local kid.
Yeah, well, somewhat, just an Army brat. But it was amazing to me to see the Hokulea sail into New York Harbor and past the Statue of Liberty, and to be met by a multitude of people who represented Hawaii or Polynesians there in New York City itself, and to welcome them with a traditional Hawaiian welcome. I was really impacted by that.
Well, it is amazing to see the Hokulea under sail. It's amazing to see how they do what they do, and realize 1,000 years ago they were just crisscrossing the Pacific Ocean, and they knew where they were going. There were two separate migrations to here in Hawaii, and it is an amazing accomplishment, and it's not really being taught in our schools. It deserves at least as much recognition as
really
what
being
Columbus
talked
did.
About at all.
Yeah.
In fact, the voyage, the Polynesian, the effort, this whole effort for the last 2 years, and it's ongoing. This is not the end of the voyage. This is
Oh, it is going to take them a while to complete this, because it is a sailing ship and it's not particularly fast. And it doesn't even have a keel, and that's one of the drawbacks, is they can't tack to windward, so they have to be very, very careful about their navigation.
Right. It's a dual hulled.
It's catamaran.
Yeah, basically, yes. I built a 1/48 scale model of it in 2004 on the first Hokulea. Now, I'm sure they've modified it, and they use different methods to... I'm not sure how many crew are on the Hokulea.
I do not know. I did get to see it dismantled when they were renovating it, updating it, and I got to look inside the structure there. I would love if you would send me a picture of that 48 scale model. I'd love to see that.
I will.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to have to let you go. Got to take a break for commercials. Back with the last segment of our program after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our program. Last segment of our show today, and the evil ones are back trying to wreck my server again. So they should just stand there with a sign saying, I don't actually have an argument. I'm just here to push my agenda, and I don't care how I do it. And there's kind of a red warning sign, because Hillary is going to do whatever it takes, anything, to sit in the White House. And we need to remember, those who are willing to do anything to gain power are equally willing to do anything with it once they have it. We already know there's been massive election fraud going on. And I'm very, very concerned that there's going to be an assassination attempt on Donald Trump. And I hope he's got his Kevlar around him and his protective detail. Because the Ron Paul approach did not get him out of the race. That means they're thinking about the Robert Kennedy approach. Remember, Hillary Clinton was trying to engineer the GOP campaign so she was going to be running against somebody easy to beat, like Ted Cruz. The last person she wanted to run against was Donald Trump because Donald Trump conceivably can beat her. In an honest election, he will, by a landslide. So we just need to keep an eye on all of this skullduggery going on. Okay, apparently high retail inventories are weakening import volumes, which is simply because we don't have money to buy stuff anymore. The money junkies got it all. And Ralph Lauren is closing stores, Nordstrom is closing stores, Macy's are cutting jobs. You cannot have an operating economy where all the money is sucked up to the very top and there's none left to run the society. There aren't enough of those ultra-rich to go around to all the shopping malls and buy all the consumer goods to keep the consumer economy going. And prior to the 2008 mortgage-backed security fraud, consumer spending was 60% of the nation's economy. And it's rapidly, rapidly falling. And you cannot run a national economy purely on catering to the 1%ers. Because you have a lot of people out of work. And all this talk about robots is only going to make it worse. It's a very, very dire situation. And it's all driven by economics and private central banking. And it's amazing to think about it. But when you look at how callous ultra-rich and ultra-powerful people are about ordinary human beings, about the military, about the poor, you begin to understand why they're actually willing to risk incineration of the surface of planet Earth in an argument over which piece of paper and ink we're going to use. Just a quick reminder, John Stadmiller's show is coming up here following the end of my broadcast. I hope you'll stay tuned because he's got lots and lots of very interesting and informative things to say. There's the music. Time for me to get on out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We'll be back tomorrow, Thursday, here on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay informed, stay skeptical, make good choices, share what you know with who you know. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.